Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Constellation, staring at the star map that showed their position 3 days out from Earth. The exploration ship was returning from a routine survey mission when the emergency signal came through. The message crackled with static, but the voice was unmistakable. It belonged to Elder Silas, one of the Zilani leaders from Kepler Prime. Human friends. Under attack. Council ships. Please help us. Chen felt her blood turn cold. The Zilani were humanity's first alien friends in the galaxy. 5 years ago, when Earth's colony ship accidentally jumped into their star system, the plant-like beings could have seen humans as invaders. Instead, they welcomed the lost colonists with open arms and gentle songs that sounded like wind through leaves. Navigation, set course for Kepler Prime, maximum speed, Chen ordered. Her crew moved quickly across the bridge, their faces showing the same worry she felt. Lieutenant Torres looked up from his station. Captain, that will take us 18 hours at full power. 18 hours. Chen hoped they would not be too late. The Zilani had changed everything for humanity. Before meeting them, humans thought they were alone in the universe. The Zilani taught them about the Galactic Council, the great organization that governed thousands of species across the galaxy. They shared their knowledge of space travel, their amazing biotechnology, and most importantly, they vouched for humanity when the Council decided whether to accept Earth as a member. Elder Silas himself had spoken for humanity at the Great Assembly on Nexus Prime. Chen remembered watching the recording of his speech. The tall, tree-like being had stood before thousands of alien representatives and said that humans possessed something rare in the galaxy, the ability to grow and change quickly while still caring for others. They are young, but their hearts are good, Silas had said in his musical voice. They will bring new life to our ancient galaxy. The Council had granted humanity junior membership, which meant Earth could trade and explore, but had limited voting rights. Most humans were happy, just to be accepted. The Zilani had made it possible. Now someone was attacking them. The hours passed slowly. Chen walked between the bridge stations, checking their progress. The Constellation was not a warship. It was built for exploration and research, but it carried some weapons for protection against pirates and dangerous creatures. When they finally dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system, what they saw made Chen's heart break. Massive ships hung in space above Kepler Prime like metal vultures. These were not the graceful vessels the Zilani built from living wood and crystal. These were the angular, brutal warships of the Vorthak, the reptilian race that served as the Council's military force. Chen counted 12 dreadnoughts, each one 3 times the size of her ship. Below them, Kepler Prime was burning. "My God," whispered Torres. "They're destroying everything." The planet that had once been covered in beautiful biocities, living structures grown from modified trees that housed millions of Zilani, was now scarred with fires and explosions. The orbital bombardment was systematic and thorough. The Vorthak were not just attacking military targets. They were destroying everything that could support life. "Captain," called out Communications Officer Park, "I'm picking up scattered transmissions from the planet's surface. Some Zilani are still alive down there." "Any from Elder Silas?" "Checking. Yes, there's a weak signal from the Great Grove. That's where the Council of Elders meets." Chen made her decision. "Take us in. We're going to get as many survivors as we can." "Captain, those dreadnoughts will destroy us," Torres warned. "We can't fight 12 ships." "We're not going to fight. We're going to save lives." The Constellation dove toward the planet, using the smoke and debris from the bombardment to hide their approach. The Vorthak ships seemed focused on their destruction work and did not notice the small human vessel at first. Chen's ship landed near the burning remains of the Great Grove. The bio-city that had once stretched for kilometers was now mostly ash and dying wood. But deep in the root systems, some Zilani had survived. The rescue operation took 3 hours. Chen's crew worked frantically to load refugees into their cargo holds. The Zilani came in groups of families, carrying nothing but their children and the few possessions they could grab. Many were injured, their bark-like skin burned and their leaf hair singed. Elder Silas was among the last to board. The ancient Zilani leader looked much older than Chen remembered. His trunk was cracked and many of his branches were broken, but his eyes still held their gentle wisdom. "Captain Chen," he said in English, his voice like rustling leaves. "You came?" "Of course we came. You're our friends." Silas touched her arm with one of his root fingers. "I fear this friendship has doomed us both." Before Chen could ask what he meant, alarms began screaming throughout the ship. 3 Vorthak dreadnoughts had noticed them and were moving to attack. "Get us out of here," Chen shouted. The constellation lifted off just as energy beams scorched the ground where they had landed. The ship shook as near misses from the massive alien weapons sent shockwaves through their shields. Chen's pilot was good, but the Vorthak ships were faster. As they climbed toward space, weapons fire grew more accurate. The ship's shields began to fail. "We're not going to make it," Torres reported. That was when something unexpected happened. Other small ships began appearing from hidden places around the planet. Zilani vessels that had been hiding in asteroid fields and gas clouds. They were not warships, just merchant vessels and research craft. But they threw themselves between the constellation and the Vorthak dreadnoughts. "They're buying us time," Park said, tears in her eyes as she watched the brave Zilani ships being destroyed one by one. The constellation reached the edge of the star system and jumped to hyperspace just as the last Zilani rescue ship exploded in a ball of fire. In the quiet after the jump, Chen made her way to the cargo hold where the refugees were gathered. She had saved 437 Zilani out of a population that had once numbered in the billions across 12 worlds. Elder Silas was sitting with a group of younglings, telling them a story to keep them calm. When he saw Chen, he gestured for her to sit beside him. "Why?" she asked. "Why did the council do this?" The old Zilani's voice was very quiet. "Because we shared our biotechnology with humanity. Because we believed that growth and change were good things. The old powers of the council fear change, Captain. They have ruled for thousands of years by keeping things exactly as they are. But the council voted to accept humanity as members, as junior members with no real power. They thought they could control you, make you like all the other young races, quiet and obedient. But when they saw how quickly humans learned how you and we worked together to create new things, they became afraid." Silas touched one of the younglings gently. "They decided that races like ours were dangerous. We think too fast. We change too quickly. We might someday challenge their rule. So they decided to murder you all. Yes, and soon they will come, for humanity too." Chen felt a cold anger growing in her chest. The Zilani had been the kindest beings she had ever met. They had welcomed humanity with open arms, shared their knowledge freely, and asked for nothing in return but friendship, and the council had murdered them for it. Over the next few days, as the constellation raced back toward Earth, reports came in from other Zilani worlds. All 12 planets were under attack. Ancient biocities that had taken centuries to grow were being burned to ash. An entire species that had existed for millions of years was being wiped out in a matter of days. By the time Chen's ship reached Earth space, only scattered handfuls of survivors remained. The Zilani, humanity's first and kindest friends among the stars, were extinct. Chen stood in her quarters looking out at Earth, beautiful, blue, and so very fragile. Somewhere out there, the council was already making plans for humanity's future. Plans that probably looked very much like what had happened to Kepler Prime, but humans were not Zilani. The plant people had been peaceful gardeners who believed in growth and cooperation. Humans had those qualities too, but they had something else as well, something that had kept them alive on a world full of predators and disasters. Humans knew how to fight, and when someone hurt their friends, humans knew how to hate. The age of human innocence in the galaxy was over. What came next would be very different. 3 weeks after the massacre at Kepler Prime, Captain Sarah Chen stood in the vast council chamber of Nexus Prime. The massive space station was the size of a small moon, and its central assembly hall could hold representatives from thousands of different species. Chen had requested an emergency hearing to demand answers about the attack on the Zilani. Earth's government had sent her as their representative, thinking that her friendship with Elder Silas might help her get the truth. They were wrong. The council chamber was designed to make anyone standing in the center feel small and powerless. Thousands of seats rose up in circles around the speaker's platform, filled with beings of every possible shape and size. There were floating gas beings from Arcturus, crystalline entities from the core worlds, and massive insectoid creatures from the spiral arm colonies. But the real power in the chamber belonged to the inner circle, 5 ancient races that had dominated the galaxy for so long that most species couldn't remember a time when they didn't rule. Their seats were positioned high above all the others, carved from precious metals and decorated with symbols of their authority. High Arbitrator. Thexmore presided over the session from the highest seat. The crystalline being was over 50,000 years old, and his species had been part of the inner circle since before most stars in the galaxy were born. His voice echoed strangely when he spoke, like sound passing through broken glass. Captain Chen of the human species, Thexmore announced, his words automatically translated into Chen's language by the chamber's systems. You have requested this emergency session to discuss recent events in the Kepler system. The Council recognizes your right to speak. Chen stepped forward to the center platform. She had prepared for this moment during the long journey to Nexus Prime, but seeing all, those alien eyes focused on her still made her heart pound. Honored Council, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. 3 weeks ago, ships of the Galactic Council attacked and destroyed 12 worlds belonging to the Zelani people. Billions of innocent beings were murdered. I demand to know why. A murmur went through the assembled representatives. Some sounded shocked, as if they hadn't known about the attacks. Others seemed annoyed that Chen was bringing up the subject. Thexmore raised one crystalline hand for silence. Captain Chen, your choice of words is unfortunate. The Council does not murder anyone. We took necessary action to prevent a galactic contamination crisis. Contamination? Chen couldn't keep the anger out of her voice. The Zelani were peaceful. Gardeners. They never hurt anyone. Precisely the problem, rumbled War Speaker Kaxthar from his seat in the inner circle. The Vorthak leader was massive even for his species, with scales that looked like black armor and eyes that glowed red in the chamber's light. The Zelani were contaminating the galaxy with dangerous ideas about unrestricted growth and change. Another, inner circle member Eternal Mind Volith of the ancient machine race, spoke in a voice like grinding gears. Our analysis showed that Zelani biotechnology, especially when combined with human innovation, presented a clear threat to galactic stability. Chen stared up at them in disbelief. They were sharing medical knowledge and farming techniques. How is that a threat? Because, young human, you do not understand the balance that has kept this galaxy peaceful for millennia. Thexmore explained in a tone like he was speaking to a child. Species must know their place. They must accept their role in the greater order. The Zelani forgot this truth. What role? Chen demanded. Who decided these roles? We did, said Chancellor Morden of the Hegemonic Collective, the 4th member of the Inner Circle. His species looked like floating jellyfish made of metal, and his voice was cold and electronic. We who have the wisdom of eons, we who have seen what happens when young species are allowed to grow without guidance. The 5th member of the Inner Circle, Sage Queen Larthessa of the Eternal Dynasty, finally spoke. Her species looked almost human, but their beauty was so perfect it seemed artificial. The Zelani were teaching you to modify living creatures, to make plants and animals that never existed before. Do you not see the danger in this? I see the danger of curing diseases and growing food on barren worlds, Chen shot back. You see? Only the surface, Larthessa continued. Biotechnology that can cure can also kill. Plants that can terraform can also destroy entire ecosystems. The Zelani were giving weapons of mass destruction to a species that has existed for less than a century, in galactic terms. Thexmore activated a holographic display above the chamber floor. Images appeared showing Zelani biolabs and human research facilities. Evidence gathered by Council intelligence services shows that this biotechnology was being weaponized. The Zelani and humans were developing biological agents capable of restructuring entire worlds. Chen stared at the images. Some of them looked familiar. She recognized medical research labs on Earth and agricultural stations on human colonies, but the way they were being presented made them look sinister and threatening. "Those are hospitals and farms," she said. "According to your records, yes," Voleth replied, "but our analysis shows their potential for military applications. A facility that can engineer crops can also engineer viruses. A medical lab that modifies genetics can also create biological weapons. We never made any weapons." "Not yet," Kexthar growled. "But you would have. All young species eventually turn their tools into weapons when they grow strong enough to challenge the established order." Chen began to understand what was really happening. This wasn't about weapons or contamination. This was about fear. The ancient powers of the Inner Circle were afraid that humanity and the Zilani represented something they couldn't control. "You're afraid of us," she said. Silence fell over the chamber. Then Thexamore laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Afraid? Captain, your species has existed for perhaps 200,000 years. My people have ruled star systems since before your son was born. What could we possibly fear from you?" "Change," Chen replied. "You're afraid that young species might find better ways of doing things. You're afraid that your ancient rule might not be the best way to run a galaxy." The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. The Inner Circle members exchanged looks that Chen couldn't read. "Captain Chen," Thexamore said finally, his voice much colder now, "you seem to misunderstand your position here. Humanity was granted junior membership in this council as a courtesy, based on the recommendation of the now extinct Zilani. That membership comes with certain responsibilities." "What kind of responsibilities?" War Speaker Kaxthar leaned forward in his seat. "First, your military forces will be inspected and regulated by council oversight. No species can be allowed to maintain weapons that might threaten galactic peace. Second," continued Voleth, "your research into biotechnology will cease immediately. All samples, data, and equipment will be turned over to council scientists for proper disposal. Third," added Morden, "each human world will accept council governors to ensure compliance with galactic law and to prevent future contamination incidents." Larathessa delivered the final condition. "And fourth, your species will submit to genetic monitoring to ensure that human evolution proceeds along approved lines. We cannot allow another race of dangerous innovators to threaten stability." Chen felt her heart sink as she realized what they were really saying. "You want us to become your slaves?" "We want you to become civilized," Thexamore corrected. "To accept your proper place in the galactic order, as thousands of species have done before you. And if we refuse?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Finally, Kexthar spoke in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. "Then humanity will be declared a galactic contamination risk, just like the Zilani, and contamination must be cleansed." Chen looked around the chamber at thousands of alien faces. Some looked sympathetic, others seemed bored, and many appeared frightened. She realized that most of these species had probably been given similar ultimatums long ago. They had chosen to submit rather than fight. "How long do we have?" she asked. 30 standard days, Thexamore announced. "Earth's government has 30 days to accept council oversight, surrender your military forces, and submit to our governance. If you refuse, the council will take whatever actions are necessary to protect galactic stability." The session was declared over, and Chen was escorted out of the chamber by Vorthak guards. As she walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime toward her ship, she thought about Elder Silas and the hundreds of Zilani refugees now living on Earth. The old plant being had been right. Friendship with the Zilani had doomed humanity too, but not in the way Chen had expected. It wasn't their friendship that was the problem. It was what that friendship represented. Hope, growth, change. The possibility that the galaxy didn't have to be ruled forever by ancient powers who feared anything new. As her ship prepared to leave Nexus Prime, Chen recorded a message to send to Earth. She looked into the camera and thought about how to explain that humanity had 30 days to choose between slavery and extinction. But even as she recorded the message, another thought was forming in her mind. The inner circle had made one crucial mistake in their calculations. They had studied humanity's potential for biological warfare. President Maria Santos stood before the emergency session of the Global Defense Council in Geneva, watching the recording of Captain Chen's appearance before the Galactic Council for the third time. Around the massive conference table sat the leaders of every human colony, military commanders, corporate executives, and scientific advisors. The room was dead silent except for war speaker Caxthar's voice threatening humanity with extinction if they refused to submit to council rule. When the recording ended, Santos looked around the table at faces filled with anger and determination. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said quietly, "we have a decision to make. We can surrender our freedom and become slaves to these ancient powers, or we can fight." Admiral James Harrison, commander of Earth's defense fleet, was the first to speak. The old soldier's voice was steady and cold. "Madam President, with respect, that's not really a choice. They're offering us the same deal they gave the Zilani, submission or death. The only question is whether we die on our knees or on our feet." "The math is not in our favor," added Dr. Elizabeth Warren, head of the Colonial Science Council. "Our entire fleet consists of maybe 300 ships. Most of them are exploration vessels like Captain Chen's. The Council has thousands of warships." "Numbers aren't everything," Harrison replied. "But you're right that we can't fight them the way they expect us to fight. We need advantages they don't know about." Santos turned to a man sitting at the far end of the table. Director Michael Reeves ran humanity's black-budget military research programs, the projects that officially didn't exist. "Michael, it's time to tell us about Thanatos." The room stirred with interest. Most of the people present had heard rumors about secret military projects, but few knew any details. Reeves stood up and activated a holographic display above the table. Project Thanatos began 8 years ago, shortly after we made contact with the Zilani. While we were presenting a peaceful face to the galaxy, some of us wondered what would happen if we met species that weren't as friendly. The display showed a star map with several locations highlighted in the outer solar system. We built construction yards in the Kuiper Belt, hidden among asteroids and comets. For the past 5 years, we've been building ships using a combination of human engineering and Zilani biotechnology. Images appeared of sleek vessels that looked nothing like the boxy, functional ships of Earth's regular fleet. These ships had curves that seemed almost organic, hulls that appeared to shift and shimmer, and weapon systems that pulsed with strange energy. "How many ships?" Harrison asked. "Currently operational?" 47. But they're not like our regular vessels. Each one is part machine, part living organism. They can heal damage to their hulls, adapt their systems to new situations, and interface directly with their crews through neural links. Dr. Warren leaned forward. "You've been experimenting on human beings?" "Volunteers only," Reeves assured her. "Pilots who wanted to be part of something new. The neural interface doesn't change them permanently, but when they're connected to their ships, they become something more than human. Faster reflexes, perfect coordination, the ability to think and react at computer speeds." President Santos studied the images carefully. "What else?" "The weapon systems use what we call evolutionary technology. Instead of firing the same energy beam or missile every time, our weapons adapt. They learn from each encounter, changing their properties to overcome whatever defenses they face. And the Vorthak don't know about any of this? As far as the Council knows, we have a small defense fleet of primitive human ships and nothing else. Our Thanatos yards are completely hidden, and all the ships were built using materials mined from asteroids. There's no trace of them in our official records." Colonel Sarah Kim, commander of the Mars Defense Force, spoke up. "What about manpower? 47 ships won't matter if we don't have trained crews." Reeves smiled. "That's where we got lucky. Remember, we've been working with Zilani biotechnology for years. We didn't just learn how to build bioships when we learned how to grow crews for them." The room erupted in shocked voices. Santos raised her hand for silence. "Explain that." "Not clones," Reeves said quickly. We're not creating artificial humans, but we have been using Zilani genetic techniques to enhance volunteers. Improved reflexes, better hand-eye coordination, enhanced spatial reasoning, increased resistance to G-forces. All temporary modifications that wear off after a few months. Harrison was studying the ship specifications on his tablet. These vessels are smaller than standard warships, but they're fast. Very fast. That's the point, Reeves explained. We can't match the Council's firepower, so we built ships designed for hit-and-run tactics. They can strike hard, then disappear. Before the enemy can respond effectively, President Santos looked around the room. I need to know, are we all in agreement? Because once we start this, there's no going back. The Council won't accept surrender after we draw first blood. One by one, the leaders around the table voiced their agreement. The colonists of Mars and Europa, the asteroid miners, the terraforming crews, the research stations. Everyone was unified in a way that surprised even Santos herself. But it was Captain Chen's voice that sealed the decision. She had been listening to the discussion via secure communication from her ship, which was still racing back from Nexus Prime. Madam President, Chen said, her image appearing on the main screen. I've been thinking about what Elder Silas told me before he died. He said that the Council fears change because they've ruled for so long by keeping things exactly as they are. But humans are different. We've never lived in a galaxy where someone told us our place and expected us to stay there forever. She paused, and when she continued, her voice was filled with quiet fury. The Zilani welcomed us with open arms when we stumbled into their space. They shared everything they had with us, asked for nothing in return, and died because they called us friends. If we submit to the Council now, their sacrifice means nothing. Santos nodded. Admiral Harrison, how quickly can we mobilize? Give me 2 weeks to get our people in position. Reeves, I'll need complete tactical specifications on all Thanatos vessels and their capabilities. You'll have them within the hour. Dr. Warren raised her hand. What about the civilian population? If we're going to war, Earth and the colonies will be targets. Evacuation plans are already in place, Harrison replied. Non-essential personnel will be moved to the outer system installations. Anyone who stays does so knowing the risks. President, Santos stood up. Then it's decided we go to war. Over the next 2 weeks, humanity transformed itself with a speed that amazed even their own leaders. The secret Thanatos yards worked around the clock to complete ships and train crews. Colonial militias that had existed mainly on paper suddenly became real fighting forces. Research stations became fortified bases. Mining operations in the asteroid belt turned into supply depots for a growing fleet. But the most important change was psychological. For the first time in human history, the entire species was truly united. There were no nations, no competing ideologies, no arguments about resources or territory. There was only one enemy and one goal: to make the Council pay for what they had done to the Zilani. Captain Chen returned to Earth just as the first Thanatos ships emerged from their hidden construction yards. Her old exploration vessel, the Constellation, was chosen to be retrofitted with the new biotechnology. When the conversion was complete, she barely recognized her ship. The hull now had a pearlescent quality that seemed to shift colors depending on the angle of view. Weapon ports that had once been simple metal openings were now organic-looking apertures that pulsed with their own light. The bridge had been completely rebuilt with neural interface stations that would allow the crew to merge their consciousness with the ship's systems. It's beautiful, Chen said as she walked through her transformed vessel. But will it fight? Commander Lisa Park, one of the enhanced volunteers who would serve as Chen's tactical officer, smiled. The neural modifications had given her eyes a slight silver tint, but she was still recognizably human. Captain, once you link with this ship, you'll never want to fly anything else. It's not just a machine anymore, it's alive, and it wants to protect its crew. Chen took her position in the captain's chair and activated the neural link for the first time. The sensation was indescribable. Suddenly she could feel the ship's hull as if it were her own skin, sense the flow of energy through its systems like blood in her veins, and perceive space around them through sensors that were more sensitive than human eyes. My God, she whispered, I can feel everything. That's just the beginning. Park said. Wait until we go into combat. The ship will anticipate your orders, adapt to threats faster than you can think, and coordinate with other vessels like parts of the same organism. Admiral Harrison's voice came through the communication system. All ships, this is Fleet Command. We have reports that Vorthak scout vessels have been spotted near the edge of our solar system. They're probably coming to check on our compliance with the Council's ultimatum. Chen smiled, and she felt her ship respond to her emotions with a surge of anticipation. Admiral, request permission to take the first patrol out to meet them. Granted, Captain. Show them what we've become. Captain Sarah Chen felt her ship respond to her thoughts as they approached the edge of the solar system. The neural link with her bio-vessel had become as natural as breathing over the past month of combat operations. Around her, 11 other human ships moved in perfect coordination, their hulls shifting color to match the darkness of space. Contact bearing 27 Mark 8, reported Lieutenant Park from her tactical station. It's a Vorthak patrol squadron, 3 heavy cruisers. Chen smiled grimly. For 6 weeks, humanity had been waging a very different kind of war against the Galactic Council. Instead of meeting their massive fleets in open battle, human forces had been striking at the infrastructure that kept the ancient empire running. They hit supply convoys carrying resources to Council worlds. They destroyed communication relays that connected distant star systems. They sabotaged mining operations that fed the Council's war machine. And they did it all using tactics that the rigid, tradition-bound Council forces couldn't understand or counter. Remember, Chen told her squadron, we're not here to destroy them. We're here to send a message. The Vorthak ships were impressive. Each one was 5 times the size of Chen's vessel and carried enough firepower to level a city. But they were also predictable. Council military doctrine hadn't changed in thousands of years, and their commanders still thought in terms of massive fleet battles and overwhelming force. All ships attack pattern 7, Chen ordered. Let's show them how humans dance. The bioships scattered like a school of fish, each one moving in a different direction. The Vorthak cruisers immediately formed a defensive triangle and began firing their main weapons, massive energy beams that could punch through traditional shields and armor. But the human ships weren't where the beams were aimed. They moved with an organic fluidity that confused the Council targeting systems. One moment they were directly ahead of the enemy formation, the next they were attacking from 3 different angles. Chen's ship dove beneath the lead Vorthak cruiser, its hull changing color to match the metal of the enemy vessel. The bioweapons charged and fired, not the steady energy beams the Council expected, but adaptive projectiles that shifted their properties as they flew. The first salvo struck the Vorthak ship's shields, which flared and held. But the second salvo had already adapted, changing frequency and intensity to match what the shields could block. The third salvo punched through completely, tearing into the cruiser's hull. Direct hit on their primary weapons array, Park reported. They're losing power to their main guns. The other human ships struck at the same time, each targeting a different system on the 3 Council vessels. Within minutes, the proud Vorthak squadron was crippled. Their weapons offline, their engines damaged, their communication systems destroyed. But Chen didn't order the killing blow. Open a channel to the lead ship, she commanded. The face of a Vorthak commander appeared on the main screen. His scales were scarred from many battles, and his red eyes burned with fury and confusion. I am Fleet Captain Veltar of the Hegemonic Navy, he growled. Your surrender will be accepted if you— You're not in a position to accept anything, Chen interrupted. Your ships are disabled, your weapons are offline, and you're drifting in space with minimal life support. I could destroy all 3 of your vessels right now. Veltar's eyes narrowed. Then why don't you? Because I want you to carry a message back to the Council. Tell them that humanity remembers the Zilani. Tell them we remember every world they destroyed, every life they took, every friend they murdered, and tell them that this is just the beginning. Chen cut the transmission and ordered her squadron to withdraw. Behind them, the 3 Vorthak cruisers began emergency repairs while broadcasting distress calls to the nearest Council base. It was the same pattern human forces had been following across dozens of star systems. Strike hard, disable the enemy, Then let them live to spread the word that humanity was not going to submit quietly. But Chen knew that the real test was coming. Intelligence reports suggested that the Council was finally taking the human threat seriously. War Speaker Cakestar himself was leading a massive fleet to crush the insect rebellion once and for all. 3 days later, that fleet found them. Chen's ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Proxima system, where one of humanity's oldest colonies was located. What she saw made her heart sink. The Council fleet was enormous, over 200 ships, including dozens of dreadnoughts, and the massive flagship Eternal Dominion. "Captain," Park said quietly, "that's Caxthar's personal command ship. It's over 1 kilometer long and carries enough firepower to crack a planet." Chen studied the tactical display. The human fleet numbered only 60 ships, and most of those were the smaller biovessels like her own. In a traditional battle, they would be completely outmatched. "Admiral Harrison to all ships," came the voice of the fleet commander over the communication channel. "This is it, people. We all knew this day was coming. The Council has sent their best to finish us off." Chen felt her ship respond to her emotions, its hull darkening with determination. Around the bridge, her crew prepared their stations with calm efficiency. These were volunteers who had chosen to risk everything rather than live as slaves. "The plan remains the same," Harrison continued. "We don't try to match their firepower. We be what they can't understand or predict. We be human." The battle began when the Council fleet opened fire with their long-range weapons. Streams of energy and clouds of missiles filled the space between the two forces. It was an awesome display of destructive power, enough to sterilize worlds. But the human ships weren't there when the weapons arrived. The biovessels scattered in all directions, some diving toward the system's star, others heading for the asteroid field, still others disappearing behind Proxima's moons. The rigid Council formation found itself shooting at empty space, while enemy ships struck from unexpected angles. Chen led her squadron in a direct assault on one of the Vorthak dreadnoughts. The massive ship turned its weapons toward them, filling space with deadly energy. But the human ships moved like living things, dancing between the beams and missiles. "Adaptive weapons locked on target," Park reported. Firing, the bioweapons struck the dreadnought's shields and immediately began learning. Each shot was different from the last, probing for weaknesses, adapting to the enemy's defenses. Within minutes, the ancient Vorthak shields, technology that had protected their ships for thousands of years, began to fail. Across the battlefield, the same thing was happening. Human ships that seemed small and fragile compared to the Council dreadnoughts were systematically dismantling their opponents. The bioweapons learned faster than the Council engineers could adapt. The organic hulls absorbed damage and healed themselves while enemy systems overloaded and failed. But the Eternal Dominion was different. Kexthar's flagship was a mobile fortress, bristling with weapons and protected by shields that had never been breached in battle. As Chen watched, the massive vessel cut through a group of human ships like they were toys. "All squadrons, this is Chen," she broadcast. "I'm taking my group after the flagship. Keep the rest of their fleet busy." "Captain, that's suicide," Park protested. "That ship has 10,000 crew members and enough weapons to fight an entire fleet." Chen felt her bioship pulse with agreement. It wanted to face the strongest enemy, to prove what humanity could become when they refused to accept defeat. "Maybe," Chen admitted, "but someone has to try. And I have a score to settle with Caxthar." Her squadron of 12 ships broke away from the main battle and headed straight for the Eternal Dominion. The massive flagship immediately focused its fire on them, turning space into a storm of energy and metal. 3 human ships were destroyed in the first few seconds, but the survivors pressed on, their hulls shifting and adapting to absorb the worst of the damage. Chen felt her ship's pain as enemy fire scorched its living hull, but she also felt its determination to protect its crew. They reached the Eternal Dominion's hull and began the most dangerous part of their mission. While the other ships kept the flagship's weapons busy, Chen's vessel found a docking port and began cutting through the armored hull with bioweapons that ate through metal like acid. "Boarding teams, prepare for assault," Chen ordered. The humans who had volunteered for this mission were enhanced like their ships, faster, stronger, and more adaptable than normal people. But they were still human, facing an enemy that had conquered 1,000 worlds. The interior of the Eternal Dominion was a maze of corridors designed for beings much larger than humans. Vorthak warriors met them at every turn, massive reptilian soldiers in powered armor, armed with weapons that could punch through tank armor. But the humans fought with a fury that the Vorthak couldn't understand. These weren't soldiers following orders or warriors seeking glory. These were people fighting for the memory of friends who had been murdered, for the future of their species, for the right to exist in a galaxy that didn't want them. Chen led the assault toward the bridge, following corridors that her ship's biosensors mapped in real time. Behind her, enhanced humans battled Vorthak elites in combat that was more like a force of nature than a military engagement. When they finally reached the command center, Chen found herself face. 1 year after the death of Warspeaker Kaxthar, Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the massive space station Nexus Prime grow larger on the screen. The seat of Council power looked different now. Its outer sections were dark and lifeless, and debris from destroyed defense platforms drifted around it like a metal graveyard. The war had spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Chen's message from the captured Eternal Dominion had reached thousands of worlds, and young species everywhere began to remember that they didn't have to live under the boot of ancient masters forever. The Kalari, a bird-like race from the Spiral Arm, had been the first to openly rebel. They seized control of their star system and declared independence from Council rule. Within weeks, the insectoid Threx colonies had joined them, followed by the aquatic Mordai and dozens of other species. But the real turning point came when some of the older races began switching sides. The Altarians, who had served the Council faithfully for 10,000 years, suddenly announced that they too were tired of being second-class citizens in their own galaxy. Their defection brought advanced technology and tactical knowledge that the rebellion desperately needed. Now, after months of battles across hundreds of star systems, the combined rebel fleets had finally reached Nexus Prime itself. The Council's last stronghold was surrounded, its ancient masters trapped inside like rats in a cage. "Admiral," reported Lieutenant Commander Park from her station, "all fleet elements are in position. We have confirmation from Altarian Command, Kalari Strike Force and the Threx Swarm. The blockade is complete." Chen nodded, studying the tactical display that showed nearly 3,000 ships from dozens of different species. It was the largest military force in galactic history, united not by conquest or domination, but by a simple desire for freedom. "Any word from the Council?" she asked. "High Arbitrator Thexmore is requesting negotiations," Park replied. "He says the Inner Circle is prepared to discuss terms." Chen almost laughed. After a year of desperate fighting, watching their ancient empire crumble system by system, the Council Masters finally wanted to talk. "Tell him we'll discuss terms after they surrender unconditionally," she said, "and open a channel to all ships. It's time." The faces of her fellow commanders appeared on screens around the bridge. There was Admiral Kekvar of the Kalari, his feathers bright with battle paint. Commander Zixthala of the Threx Swarm clicked her mandibles in anticipation. Captain Morgeth of the Altarian Navy nodded gravely. "Friends," Chen began, "we've come a long way from the massacre at Kepler Prime. Today we finish what the Council started when they decided that some species were too dangerous to be allowed to exist." She paused, thinking of Elder Silas and all the Zilani who had died simply for believing in growth and change. "This isn't about revenge anymore. This is about the future. We're going to build something better than what came before. A galaxy where young species don't have to beg permission to dream." The assault on Nexus Prime began with a bombardment that lit up space like a new star. But these weren't the indiscriminate attacks the Council had used against civilian targets. The rebels focused on military installations and government centers, carefully avoiding the residential areas where millions of non-combatants lived. The station's defenses were formidable: energy shields that had protected it for millennia, weapon platforms that could destroy entire fleets, and automated systems that had never been defeated in battle. But they had never faced anything like the combined rebel armada. Human bioships used their adaptive weapons to find weaknesses in the ancient shields. Kalari fighters, with their incredible speed and agility, slipped past defensive fire to strike at vulnerable points. Threx swarm tactics overwhelmed the automated systems with sheer numbers, and Altarian technology, turned against its former masters, proved devastatingly effective. Within hours, the outer defenses were breached. Rebel forces poured into Nexus Prime through a dozen different entry points, fighting their way toward the central government complex where the Inner Circle had their stronghold. Chen led one of the assault teams herself, moving through corridors she remembered from her appearance before the council a year ago. But everything was different now. The halls that had once been filled with the arrogant certainty of eternal rule were now scenes of desperate last stands. Vorthak warriors, the council's elite guards, fought with the fury of beings who knew their world was ending. Crystalline. Security forces tried to hold choke points with weapons that could slice through armor, but they were facing enemies who had learned to fight not just with weapons, but with hope. The rebels pressed forward, taking casualties, but never stopping. They had come too far to be turned back now. When Chen finally reached the Inner Circle's council chamber, she found High Arbitrator Thexmore waiting for her. The ancient crystalline being sat alone in the vast room that had once held the representatives of thousands of species. His fellow Circle members were nowhere to be seen. "Captain Chen," he said, his voice no longer carrying the authority it once had. "Or should I say Admiral? You have exceeded all our calculations." "Where are the others?" Chen asked, her weapon trained on the being who had condemned humanity to extinction. "Dead, fled, or surrendered," Thexmore replied. "Volith destroyed himself rather than face capture. Morden is in hiding somewhere in the outer spiral. Larthessa tried to negotiate a separate peace with the Altarians. They handed her over to a Kalari war tribunal yesterday." Chen felt a mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. After all this fighting, the great enemies of freedom turned out to be just frightened old beings clinging to power they could no longer maintain. "And you?" she asked. "I am tired," Thexmore admitted. "My species has ruled for 50,000 years. We thought we were maintaining order, preserving stability. But perhaps we were only preserving ourselves." Chen lowered her weapon slightly. "The Zilani didn't threaten your stability. They just wanted to share their knowledge and help others grow." "Yes," the High Arbitrator said quietly. "And that terrified us. Not because they were dangerous, but because they offered something we had forgotten how to do. They offered hope." Before Chen could respond, her communication device activated. Reports were coming in from across Nexus Prime. The government complex had fallen. The military command center was in rebel hands. The last council loyalists were surrendering or fleeing. "It's over," she told Thexmore. "Your empire is finished." The crystalline being stood slowly, his form seeming to dim with age and defeat. "What happens now? Will you execute us as we executed the Zilani? Will you rule as we ruled?" Chen thought about it. The easy answer would be to say yes, to take revenge for all the suffering the council had caused. But that wasn't what the Zilani would have wanted. That wasn't what this war had been fought for. "No," she said finally. "We're going to do something different. Something you never understood how to do." She activated her communicator and broadcast to the entire station. "This is Admiral Chen to all council personnel. The war is over. Any being who lays down their weapons and ceases resistance will be granted safe passage to their homeworld. We're not here to become your new masters. We're here to set you free." Over the following weeks, as the Rebel Alliance took control of Nexus Prime and began the process of dismantling the old council structure, Chen often found herself thinking about what came next. It would have been easy to simply replace one empire with another, to let the victorious species divide up the galaxy among themselves. But they chose a different path. The new Galactic Confederation was built on principles the old council had never understood. Instead of ancient races ruling over younger ones, every species had an equal voice regardless of their age or size. Instead of rigid hierarchies maintained by force, Decisions were made through cooperation and compromise. Instead of forbidding change and growth, the new government actively encouraged exploration, innovation, and the sharing of knowledge. It wasn't perfect. With thousands of different species trying to work together, there were constant disputes, misunderstandings, and conflicts. But they were resolved through debate and negotiation, not through the systematic extermination of entire peoples. 6 months after the fall of Nexus Prime, Chen found herself on a world called New Zelani. It was a beautiful planet in a system that had been abandoned after its original inhabitants were killed by Council forces. Now it was being terraformed by a joint effort of dozens of species, using Zelani biotechnology that had been preserved by the survivors. Elder Silas's son, now grown to full size, was planting the first grove of trees in what would become the planet's capital city. His name was Silthar, and he had inherited his father's gentle wisdom along with something new, a determination that his people's sacrifices would not be forgotten. "Admiral Chen," he said in his musical voice as she approached, "thank you for coming to our new beginning." Chen watched as human children played alongside young Zelani, Kalari, and Threx in the growing forest. "Your father would be proud. This is what he dreamed of, different species growing together, learning from each other." "Yes," Silthar agreed, "but it is more than that. This forest grows from soil enriched by the ashes of our enemies' ships. Beauty from destruction, life